I wanted to just first acknowledge all of you. Thank you for joining. It's lovely seeing a bunch of familiar faces. For those who are driving in the car, please be safe. I'm not going to say anyone's name, Amelia, but just please be safe while you're driving. And so today we are going to discuss a really, really cool topic, and it's the Iboga Psycho-Spiritual Journey. We're going to get into a few different layers of it, and at the end, I'll give some stories of some real life accounts we've had with the Psycho-Spiritual Journey, and then we'll have some space for any questions at the end, and then obviously open it up like always if anyone just wants to chat or hang out. But this is probably one of the coolest parts about my job, I guess you could say. And my number one job for the retreat is to just make sure everyone's safe in their experience with Iboga, that they get the right amount, that it's not too much, not too little, just that perfect sweet spot. And then my second job is this. This is really where all the study I do in the clinical world, all the books I read, everything I do is tailored to help me in this space. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, this is what really drew me to the work in the first place. And so we'll get into that here in a moment. As always, we just like to start with just always mentioning Gabon. A few of you know I just got back from my second initiation to a brand new village, Osika. Really, really incredible village out there. And right now they have a problem where the city is growing up on the villages. And so the kids are starting to turn to the cities and get away from their traditional ways. And so one of the projects we just launched is a cultural heritage and preservation project. And so we're trying to raise 20K. And our Root and Wisdom is going to pay for whatever we don't raise. And then we're basically going to help them buy a big chunk of land in the forest so they can build a traditional village and move a little bit further away from the city to maintain a lot of the Bwiti boys staying there. And so if anyone is interested about talking about going to Gabon for initiation, we have a few villages now that are really amazing. And if you are interested in donating, or if you know anybody who's trying to save money on taxes at the end of the year, that's the website up there. So just to put that up there. My spiritual father, his name is Gekado, and he grew up in the forest and can go in there and point to any medicinal plant. Like if you have a cold, he can find something. He has plants that will help you sing all night. It's actually incredibly fascinating, the wisdom he has. And so we're just trying to make sure that that's saved and it's passed on to his children, which now I am one of. So yeah, with no further ado, we'll go into the psycho-spiritual work. So what is it exactly? Um, it's really an opportunity for you and the medicine to come together with someone just present and witnessing the process to help facilitate that journey. That's really what it's about at its core. And I'll read this. A psycho-spiritual journey with Iboga is a profound unfolding where the participant, after ingesting the medicine, enters realms of consciousness that reveal profound truths and insights. And so, a way to sort of think about this, just for sort of new age people, it's like going into a virtual reality world or putting on VR goggles. And inside of that realm, it looks real, it feels real. And we're going to talk about more of the dimensions inside of this space, but that's essentially what the psycho-spiritual journey is, with the caveat that you have a trusted guide there with you, a companion. And it's really important to mention that, our job in this space isn't to tell you anything. If you're ever doing journey work with someone and people are telling you things, I would just tell them to stop. Our job is just to be present with you and ask questions about the things that are coming up. And we'll talk about why that's really important. And so that's all a psycho-spiritual journey is. And the picture on the right is a staged one, of course. We would never take photos in the ceremony of what it looks like when I'm working with you. You're laying on the bed with your eye mask on, and I'm basically sitting next to you. I'll have my medicine bag with me with all my little goodies and magic things. And yeah, we'll just go through this journey together, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So, what a psycho-spiritual journey is not. I've learned in my life that some of my best teachers have taught me what not to do. And so it's important to sort of mention these things. The first thing that's the most important to name, and it's not about the facilitator pushing his or her own agenda or interpretation. And what I mean by that is tying into the second line, it's not all about trauma. And so if you're working with someone who is a big advocate in dealing with childhood trauma and you do a psycho-spiritual journey with them, Guess what's going to inform your journey? Childhood trauma. And so the one thing you don't want to do in this situation as a facilitator or someone helping somebody in this space is ever push your agenda. You are a neutral witness. You are there to just observe, to ask questions, and to be present with somebody through the process. And again, we'll talk about some of these layers later. It's not about forcing anyone to ever revisit the past. A lot of us have had things in the past that we really don't need to go back to. And in some cases, we have some things in the past that we are willing to go back to, but it's not, there's no need there. Another aspect about it is it's not cookie cutter. You can't really create a template. I know situations where people use templates for these type of things, and that does not work because everyone's psyche is different. Everyone's spiritual space they're entering is different. Everyone's inner world is completely unique. And so each journey has to be sort of its own union between facilitator, guest, and the plant itself. It's not mandatory. We will never force anyone to do a psycho-spiritual journey ever. And we'll talk about that later. Some people are journeying themselves. Some people are just going crazy in them and they don't even know what's going on. So you can't even journey them anyways. We have sometimes where we'll go up to people and ask them how they're doing and they won't even answer because they can't, they're just in their own world. So it's not a mandatory thing. And it's definitely not something that should be done without proper guidance and experience. And the last part, which is very interesting for a lot of people to hear, it's not a traditional Bhuti practice at all, actually. And I'll get into that more in a moment. Excuse me, let me click here. And so this is a picture from Joe from her initiation. And if you can see in front of her here, there are some mirrors set up. So a very traditional practice they'll do in Gabon is as you're getting initiated, they'll sit you in front of a mirror and they'll have you stare into it. And as you see visions or have these experiences in the mirror, you say out loud, Bukaye. And then what you'll do is you'll tell the Nima or the shaman or whatever you want to call them. This is Mama Toto, Joe's spiritual mother here next to her. You'll tell them what you see, and then in real time, they'll sort of interpret or give deeper insights or guidance or invite you to run into dialogue. A simple example is in my last initiation, just about a month ago now. There was one moment where I was looking in the mirror and I saw a lion cub, a little baby lion. And it started to grow and it turned into like the full grown lion. And then it grew really old and then it died and withered away into bones. And then that thing happened again. It just kept cycling over and over and over again. And so immediately I went back to a very deep teaching that I think about all the time from the five remembrances of Buddhism. And one of them is, I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. And so for me, it was just a teaching of the life cycle process going on. Now I said Bukaye and I told the shaman and he gave me his interpretation of it, which was lovely. And I have my own, right? And so it's important to remember that this inner world, what you're seeing in the psycho-spiritual journey, it's about you. It's not about anyone else's interpretation. It's about your interpretation, what it means to you. And that meaning may evolve and change over time. And that's the beauty of it, is to just stay with it. 2 months from now, I could be somewhere and that meaning of the line could change completely. And so what we always invite people in this journey space is to stay open, to stay receptive, and have some fun. Another interesting thing is if anyone's ever heard of this man, his name was Claudio Naranjo. He was one of the first people ever to use specifically Ibogaine in sort of a therapeutic manner. He has a really lovely book if you're ever interested in reading it called The Healing Journey. You can find it on Amazon. But yeah, he's one of the earliest people to really dive into sort of the scientific and clinical investigations around Ibogaine in this more psycho-spiritual manner. There's a bunch of readings and research you can find him on online, but I just want to name this guy because to me, he's really one of the pioneers in the field of sort of creating this psycho-spiritual journey. I will tell you that the people who trained me were trained from a shaman on doing the psycho-spiritual journey, but from what I can tell, this was something that the shaman decided to start doing himself when he started working with Westerners. And so I haven't found a village in Gabon anywhere that actually does a psycho-spiritual journey. I guess number one, you would say because we don't speak French. But number two, because it's just not exactly part of the tradition. It's really a different world there in Gabon in the way they work with it. And when you're working with someone from the West, it's a different sort of nuance and approach and style that you sort of have to have. It's why we really love when we come across therapists who want to come volunteer and facilitate with us, because a therapist specifically, and we'll talk about this again later, can be really good at doing a psychospiritual journey with the assistance of Iboga. And there's just a quote from Claudio that I really love. It's surrender to being as you are. And I feel like that's very, very simple. The first thing we need to talk about in the psychospiritual journey is what is an altered state, right? Because that's what we're going into, right? We're ingesting this Iboga and we're entering some sort of altered state. Well, what does that really mean? And a definition of that could be thought of as any shift away from ordinary waking beta wave consciousness. So right now, and we'll go into this more in a moment, right now we're all in sort of a beta brainwave state. And a shift away from that is considered an altered state. So one could say that when you go into meditation, you're entering an altered state, right? And so this includes trance, meditation, dreaming, hypnosis, while working with psychedelics. You could add plant medicine there. And it's universally done across history with various traditions. And so just a quick review, I know for some of us, you probably already know this. There's these different brainwave states. Starting from the most active, we have gamma, then beta, then alpha, theta, delta. And you can see here they each have their sort of own frequency and attributes they come with. Um, Gamma up here is known as the sort of unifying consciousness, sensory processing, motor function. Beta is what we're in now. You can think of that if you're in a stressful or tense state, thinking, creativity, attention, behavior, problem solving. Alpha, which we all love very much being in, it's a relaxed awareness, alert and peaceful. And later we'll talk about the Iboga cycle and how it touches these dimensions. This is again just to introduce them. Drowsiness, creative inspiration, deep meditation, dreams for theta, and then deep sleep or coma for the delta space. And I apologize for Joe going back and forth. Our baby monitor actually knocks out the Wi-Fi somehow. It's incredible. So she's gonna be going back and forth in the background. Um, and so across cultures, there's different ways of invoking one into trance. We've all heard of like sort of the shamanic trance journey, and that's found in different countries around the world. You can do that through drumming or chanting or dance. Joe from her Taino people, they do something called mantorse, where they'll basically dance themselves into trance and allow a spirit to mount them. And the spirit will speak to them and act to them. And she grew up sort of with that tradition. There's also the Hare Krishna tradition, if you guys ever know that, where they'll chant that Hare Krishna mantra over and over and over again into a blissful state. I have a friend who's a Hare Krishna monk, and I've hung out with him a few times. And yeah, when you dive into that, you will find a state of bliss like no other. It's really beautiful. And then I have a technique that I sort of made up. It's a blend of the hypnotic regression stuff I learned from past life regression therapy and some of the sound healing stuff I do, where I will put sound bowls around you and I'll speak in a very slow, calm voice as I'm playing repetitive sounds with the sound bowls. And that repetitive motion, going back to these brainwave states, will help drop you down to this alpha state, but not just an alpha state, but a coherent alpha state, which means the majority of your brain is sort of mapped with the sort of same frequency, same flow. There's a congruency to it. And there's a real beauty and depth that comes to the hypnotic state and the trance state when you can also get that. And yeah, it's one of the things I love doing with these Tibetan bowls. It's actually really incredible. Um, if you're ever interested, I do them during the retreats when we have space, not too often anymore, but it's something I used to offer a lot. But if anyone's ever interested in trying it, you can come, feel free to ask and we can definitely set it up. It's really cool. This is a pretty cool study I came across, and just a little teaser. We have a project in the works right now with UC Irvine and UCSD. Joe and I got to go there with thankfully Amelia right there. I love you so much for putting that connection together. And what we're trying to do right now is put a study together on Iboga, not Ibogaine. And our goal is to put a longitudinal study together that compares the effects after 6 months of Iboga on the brain and Ibogaine on the brain. And I'm guaranteeing you what you're going to find is that Iboga is more beneficial for the brain than Ibogaine is. And we all know how great Ibogaine is. It's incredible. And then what that's going to happen is going to open the question of why. And from there, we have an opportunity then to start looking at the individual alkaloids inside of Iboga and running similar studies that have been done with Ibogaine, but just copying those studies with the various alkaloids. And what you're going to find from that is there's going to be specific alkaloids inside of Iboga that are finely tuned and tailored for specific functions. An example is ibogaine, one alkaloid inside of Iboga, actually has a higher affinity for the opiate receptors. In other words, it does a better job at breaking addiction. The issue is that you have more availability of ibogaine in Iboga and Volcanga, where it's sourced from. And so, of course, again, the issue down the road is going to be the sourcing, the extraction of that. But the study itself would be really interesting to sort of move through these layers. And so that's what we're doing with them. And the gentleman there shared with me, Dr. Harris shared with me this paper. And what they did, which is so cool, they call it the shamanic journey. I call it the Shamanism Study. But what they did basically, they took 7 people with fibromyalgia, right? And they paired them with a shamanic practitioner. If you look at the bottom here, there's a little photo of 2 people sitting together, and they hooked them up to an EEG. It basically measures your brain waves. And what they did was they had the shamanic practitioner drum over the course of 5 sessions. And there were some very interesting findings they had. The first was that there was a massive amount of pain reduction for those people. And so literally it alleviated pain, which is amazing. And if you see here, it lasted up to 1 month after the treatment. The next is alpha brain waves increased. And so this is associated with deep, relaxed, and trance-like states. This is why, if you ever have listened to like a shamanic drumming track on YouTube, or if you've gone and got initiated, like Stephanie, who's on here, she just got back. You go to the ceremonies and they're hitting the shakers all night. It's that repetitive motion that's putting you in this alpha brainwave, this repetitive sounds over and over and over again. And they found brain synchrony. This is a very interesting one. They found that the stronger the alpha wave coherence between patient and practitioner. And what that means is that literally your brains become more synchronized during the drumming process. So if you just think about that for a moment, you're saying that if I'm a practitioner and you're receiving, or in the example where I'm using the bowls, what's happening is our brains even are becoming synchronized. And so when you start to think about and break down the science of what shamanic practitioners are doing and how they're able to sort of navigate your inner world and work with you, you start to see the few sort of fundamental layers of that, right? You have brain synchronization between 2 individuals. Well, when you're doing a psycho-spiritual journey with someone on Iboga, the same exact thing is happening. And we'll dive into that more. And then they tested it with different music, and they showed that the effects were not seen with something like classical music. So there's something unique about the drumming aspect in this study, which I thought was just really cool to look into. This is just a research paper of what psychedelics do to the brain. A lot of you might already know this. This study, they basically use LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, and then some sort of form of synthetic DMT. I didn't see exactly what it was in the paper. But across all psychedelic studies, alpha power reliably decreased. And what that means is that the control filter for your brain decreased, which means more raw sensations, more memories, more visions come through. Obviously, as we know, if you worked with these plants, the strongest in the occipital cortex and the visual regions. And then this can be interpreted as the brain losing control, basically, or losing its grip, allowing this sort of unconscious mind to sort of flow through, which is why a lot of us go to these plants because that experience itself can be very transformative. There's a factor they found here of desynchronization between below 30 hertz. And they said there's a general loss of coherence in brainwave under 30 hertz. And this was not the exception. The exception here was with DMT. And what that means is that if your brain is operating in usual patterns, usual thinking, let's say that's I'm going to wake up and I'm going to smoke a cigarette. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to check my cell phone. Then I'm going to sit at the computer. I'm going to answer emails. These typical patterns that sort of flow through our life. What this was saying was that these patterns were disrupted. And there's actually a theory in that called the entropic brain hypothesis. And what it basically says is that if you can break these patterns, you can create plasticity. And so if anyone here, which most of you have been in an Iboga ceremony and you've heard the Bwiti music, it's polyrhythmic, it's kind of scattered and crazy. This is why the music is so important for the ceremony because it's disrupting the brain patterns. And now you get in there and you factor in the aspects that we've talked about before about the GDNF proteins, the glial cell line derived neurotropic factors, and all the things Iboga is doing to the brain. You see why it's so good at breaking these addictive patterns, why it's so good at breaking thought patterns and habits. It's really, really special, actually. So that's psychedelics in the brain. And this I found as a little research paper at Iboga sort of in trance. These studies were done with mice. So if you're an animal lover like myself, I always hate to see this stuff, but you also understand it's sort of advancing the well-being of everyone across the globe with these. So much respect to little mice who allowed us to do this. And what they did with this one is they injected rats with Ibogaine and they measured their brain pattern. And what they found was that the pattern it resembled REM sleep when they're hit with Ibogaine. And that's a theta state around 4 to 8 hertz. And just to fly back to that site or this page, it's this low theta down here, right before delta. And this is one of the last layers of sort of consciousness, you could say, before you get into the unconscious self. And we'll talk about that again later. Where am I? Whoops. Um, yeah. And so basically, Ibogaine induced a wakeful dreamlike state, right? A dream state, but yet they're awake. And then in this other study, again with Ibogaine, similar on rats, what they found is that Ibogaine also produces a sort of hybrid state in the brain where the theta increases, the alpha stays present. So you stayed in that sort of lucidity and that awareness phase, that sort of tranquilo phase. Beta obviously decreases, which is the scattered mind or the thinking mind, which a lot of us who worked with Iboga have felt that. But something very interesting is you have these gamma coherent bursts of insight and clarity. And this translates to higher cognitive functions. And I'm just going to go back to that slide one more time. This gamma, one of the aspects of gamma brainwave is this unifying consciousness. And we're going to talk about this later about different octaves, but I just want you to remember this idea of moving up this scale energetically into this sort of unified field. Just please remember that part. We'll come back to that. Cool. And so that was really just a little bit of science about Iboga and the brain and what it's doing. So basically, what we just shown here is that yes, Iboga is putting our brain in a trance-like state, which we all know, but it's just nice to have the science behind it. This is sort of the arcing theme of an Iboga journey. After ingestion, the first 0 to 2 hours, a lot of people report racing thoughts, the mind flooding with content. This could be visions, this could be thoughts, it could be anything. I mean, it's all over the place. Some of you know that we call it a brain purge. It's a very interesting time, you could say. And then from the 2 to 8 hour range is sort of that visionary phase. This is my window for really working with people in the psycho-spiritual range. And when we train people, this is the window we're working in. And you can really get in at any time within this window. So it doesn't have to be right at 2 hours. It can be later in the night. But this is when you start having those vivid visions. You start having the life review Iboga is known for. There's a lot of symbolism. In this state, what's probably happening is that, and this is one of the studies we want to do. Dr. Annette Scott is actually helping us with an EEG. We're actually going to do this. I'm going to eat a bunch of Iboga and sit in a chair. And we're going to watch the arc of my brain functions over the course of a full journey. It's going to be pretty cool. So theta increases. This is the dream imagery. Alpha stays present just like before. That's lucidity. The beta will drop. The mind will get quiet for some people. For some, it will stay very constant. And then again, the gamma burst for clarity. Around the 8 to 12 mark, you have this sort of peacefulness phase. This is why I changed the music to an ayahuasca ceremony around 8 hours in, because this visionary phase is starting to wear off. And what happens is when you get off the bleachy music and you put a really soft Aya music on and some Ramdas mantras and some stuff like that, it does a really good job of sort of fading into this peacefulness phase. And it helps sort of create this like timeless dimension where people sort of forget that the night was so long. Some people have very long nights, but for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I can't believe it's already over. And then we go into stillness day, is the day after the ceremony. And this is the day where we invite you to sit out at nature. And probably the most important thing about this phase is that your default mode network is going to be hyper suppressed. If anyone doesn't know what the default mode network is, there's a book called, I think it's Why You're Not a Buddhist. I think that's the name of the book. And the guy has a story in there about a study that was done. And what they did was they took some regular people and hooked them up to an EEG machine and they had them meditate. And what they did was they observed the default mode network. So imagine you're sitting here meditating, close your eyes, you start focusing on your breath, and you're not supposed to think of anything, right? Because you're meditating. And all of a sudden you're like, shit, I'm supposed to go to Starbucks. I got a gift card that's expiring that my friend Julie gave me. And then you're like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be meditating. You kind of come back. Every time that voice activates, your default mode network also activates at the same time. And when you bring your awareness back down, the default mode network comes back down. So they did that with regular people. And then what they did was they brought in advanced Buddhist meditators who had spent their entire lives in meditation and contemplation. They ran the same exact test. And for these people, the default mode network never activated. It stayed hyper suppressed. When I work with people with Iboga, one of the best benefits I always say to people, if you work with me, you hear me say this, is the ceremony happens like that. It's very quick. The gift of Iboga happens the next day. Because if you can use this fact that your default mode network is suppressed, you can begin to train your mind to stay that way. I had someone recently ask me, how do you quiet the mind? And what I told them is you eat a bunch of Iboga and then the next day you meditate and you practice that and you train that over and over and over again. And your mind will get super quiet. And I can tell you as a testament, it really, really works. And so that's sort of the arc of the Iboga journey. But this is our visionary phase we're really targeting with the psycho-spiritual journey. I have journeyed people in the next day, but these are sometimes, in my opinion, I think these are people who have, there's a specific enzyme in the liver, the CPY2D6 enzyme, which is responsible for metabolizing Iboga. And if you're a slow metabolizer, your journey will come on much later than others. And so I believe that the people I was journeying the next day had that slow enzyme. So they were just getting into their sort of visionary phase, but just later than everyone else. So let's go to the Eastern lens and talk about this journey stuff. This is something really cool that I found in my research. So I'm going to read a quote from the Upanishads. It says, as a hawk or a falcon flying in the sky becomes tired and stretching its wings is bound for its nest, so does this infinite being run for this state, where falling asleep he craves no desires and sees no dreams. So we'll come back to that. But right now, each of us, you could think of yourself as a point of perception inside of this reality, which quantum physics says is created by energy, right? Like right now, you're a point of perception. You're looking at this screen, but you're a point of perception inside of a certain reality, which we call waking reality. Yeah. And then you're going to fall asleep at night. And what's going to happen at some point is, again, you are going to become a point of perception inside of another sort of reality, which we call dream sleep. Difference is this reality is created by the activity of your mind, the impressions that are there, right? In the dream world, there is no iPhone, but you might have the impressions of your mind. So you might have a dream where there's an iPhone present. So it's the same observer in both. It's just you're moving from one layer or one type of reality to another type of reality. And I got to move my screen a little bit, but there's this Havok Ellis quote at the bottom. Dreams are real as long as they last. Can we say more of life? In other words, the dream world only lasts until you wake up. And this waking reality only lasts until you die. And so what that means is there must be a third layer that sort of holds all of these. And that's this dreamless sleep layer. And this is what the Upanishads are talking about. And if you never read the Upanishads, I would highly, highly, highly recommend reading them. Upanishads, there's a bunch of different ones, but if you think about like these old mystics from India, imagine they spent their life studying consciousness, and then they all wrote down their notes of their explorations, and they all put them into a box, fucking shook up the box, and then grabbed one paper out and read it. That's the Upanishads. They're freaking incredible. And there's a bunch of different ones. If you want to chat about them, I can point you in the direction of some books. But if you get the one with a review by a guy named Eknath Eshwaran, he has a bunch of them together and does an amazing review of all of them. But this dreamless state, as a falcon or hawk becomes tired and stretching its wings is bound for its nest. So basically saying the falcon must rest, right, at some point. It's also saying, so does this infinite being need to rest. In other words, it's talking about the spirit, the soul, the self, the observer within you that's moving between these realities every night. And so what it's saying is it finds its rest in this dreamless state. And what's interesting is if you think about this, this is when our nervous system does all its repairing, right? If you don't sleep, you literally will die. And so there's something that the Upanishads were cluing into here that's very, very important. And the Iboga realm, all you're really doing, to get to the next slide, is you're allowing yourself to wake up in this dreamless state. And there's a significance to that. The reason, and this is again from the Upanishads, it says, wake up in this state and you will be who you truly are, free from the conditionings of the body and mind in a world unbounded by the limitations of time, space, and causality. Wake up in the very depths of the unconscious when thought itself has ceased. What this is Upanishads are saying and what Iboga is doing, from my humble opinion, in all my explorations with it, all it's doing is it's waking you up in this dreamless state. And if we go back to our slide on the brain scans, this is that unconscious realm. It's giving you the capacity to wake up down here. And there's something really, really, really magical about that. And so, what we're doing in the Iboga journey is exploring this fundamental layer of reality, which encompasses all the other layers. It's why you can go into your life, it's why you can go into the spiritual realm. It's why people in Gabon use this to communicate with the dead. I mean, when Joe was there for her initiation, they literally had people from the village come up who she's never met, and she had to divine information about their life to them. I mean, you're talking about something really magical, really special happening here. And from my research, this is the best example of what's really happening is you're waking up in this dreamless state. And in that, you're becoming who you truly are. And that really is the goal for me, because that is what self-realization is about. It's about experiencing as the self, as a pure observer, free from the conditionings of the body and the mind, or the limitations of the body, I should say, and the conditionings of the mind. So how do we do this? Um, we have basically four steps that you're going to go through. We're not going to dive into this fully. We have people who are training with us, so we go into this in much, much more depth, and we'll talk about that a little later. But you basically start by checking in. That's the first thing. I'm going around everyone. I'm seeing if you need more medicine. How are you feeling? I'm asking you, hey, how are you getting along with the medicine? You might say, oh, I'm seeing all sorts of stuff. And I'll say, okay, well, how does your body feel? Oh, my body feels really, it feels like it's vibrating. How's your mind? Oh, I'm having racing thoughts. So I'm checking in with you. And then if I feel like you're in a good spot, which really what I'm saying is you can talk, 'cause, right? Some people are in a journey and they can't even communicate. You say, hey, how you doing? And they're just like, what? And you say, you ask them a question, it'll take them 10 minutes to answer and they'll forget, right? Some people you just can't journey. But you'll check in. If they are in a good journey state, then you say, cool, I'll come back. We'll start working together if that's cool with you. And they'll be like, yeah, let's do it. So then the next part will be beginning the journey. We'll talk about that. Then you'll close the journey. You never leave it unclosed. That's a big no-no in this work. And then the last part is the integrative opportunities. And that really happens not just at the rest of the retreat, but in the integration time. And these are chances for us to sort of revisit the things that came up in the journey to sort of reestablish the value and importance of them. Right. And that's a big one here because a lot of times we're experiencing these things in the psycho-spiritual journey, but we don't remember the next day, which is why a witness there with you can be helpful because they can, hey, you remember last night in the journey, you had this moment where so-and-so said this to you. I'm just curious, has that meant anything else to you since that time's transpired? And the people would be like, oh shit, you're right. I forgot about that. But yeah, now that you say it, I had an insight, and they'll go into some whole thing. And so it really is these four qualities that must come together to create the space. And I guess the big one that I should have on here that is safety, right? There has to be safety around it, or else there's no point in doing any of this work. And so what we're really doing in this journey is more of a psycho-spiritual and a psychosomatic approach. And we're really looking to work on the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual aspects that sort of all come together to create you, the total being. The psychosomatic portion of the journey, I love this photo on the right. If anyone's never seen this, it's just kind of spooky to me, but this is literally your nervous system. Just remember, your nervous system is your brain, your spinal cord, and all the auxiliary nerves in your body. It looks like an alien. It really, if you really like think about it, it's pretty incredible. So the psychosomatic journey is an opportunity for us to bring a deep-seated awareness and connection to the body with the assistance of Iboga. People think Iboga is this mind medicine, and it is, but even more than that, it's a body medicine. It's a nervous system medicine. It's a somatic tool, actually. And there's a lot of ways we do that. So if I'm approaching someone the first time and they allow me to work with them, One of the things I might ask them to do to start is to have them start taking a few deep breaths, and we'll just start breathing into the body. If anyone's ever studied Chinese medicine, we might use a microcosmic orbit. We might just breathe down to the Dan Chen, a few fingers below the navel. We might just fill up the lungs and breathe. And then we might do a body scan just to bring the awareness down into the body. One thing I really love doing, it's why one of my favorite times of the year is November. Is if the wind is blowing in the ceremony, what I'll tell them is anytime the wind blows, I want you to release something that's no longer serving you into the wind. And what you'll see the rest of the night, even after you're done working with them, is the wind will come to the ceremony space and you'll see them, or like even with their hands, release something. And if you just think about the depth and significance of that, there's a branch of psychology called eco-psychology. And the of that is that a lot of our suffering is really related to our loss of connection with nature. And so just in the first moment of a spiritual journey with Iboga, you can connect someone to an element as profound as the wind. And that's something that will stay with them. And you'll hear it. You'll get a message from somebody, yeah, it was 4 months later and I was at the beach and the wind blew and I went right back to my ceremony and just grounded me. Imagine if every time you noticed the wind touching your skin, it became a grounding medicine for you. That's a profound, profound thing. And that's what you have the ability to do in these sort of entry level points, these psychosomatic points of the journey. For some people, especially if you've been someone who's sexually abused, if you're a woman who's been raped, the body might not be a safe place to be. For myself, I tell everybody about my arm. I can't rotate my right wrist. I never wanted to be in my body. I was ashamed of it. And so the invitation has to be really slow and really patient and really intentional from the facilitator. It can't be forced. If you ever hear someone, if you hear a lot of people say, get out of your body, and they do this gesture, or get out of your mind into your body, anytime someone says that, I've always had just a weird feeling in me because how do you know that the person feels safe being in their body? Right? We're telling them to go into their body and get their mind, but what if they feel safer in their mind? What if that session for the day is meant to be all mind stuff? And so it's just important to remember that when we're doing this psycho-spiritual work, it's all about reading the patient, reading the person, the client, and understanding where they're at and getting their consent. And in this space, you can find tremendous, tremendous physical healings. The guy who gave us the land in the Caribbean, some of you might know this. The reason he did that was because he cured prostate cancer with Iboga, literally. And we have a video that shows the science of how that's possible. It has to do with the sigma receptors and their ability to basically keep the cancer cells alive. That's how calcium moves in and out. But that's one example. We've had people cure Lyme disease. I've had a woman who I'll talk about later who cured arthritis, which you can't even think of a physical, like a scientific reason. But when we talk about sort of the metaphysical, it makes sense. And so all we're doing in the psychosomatic aspect is we're bringing dis-ease into a state of ease, right? Disease is just dis-ease. That's all it is. And again, we know that there's the GDNF factors, the nerve growth factors, the myelination. There's lots of things happening that Iboga is doing on the actual nervous system itself. And so we know that even if we didn't do a psycho-spiritual journey, it's a somatic plant. It's working on the body. And if you think about Iboga being a root, if you just look at this, it looks like roots. So you already know where it's working. You can tell from the essence of the plant. And then a lot of things that happen in these somatic experiences where we go into the body with Iboga is it opens up for visionary states. But what happens a lot of times is you find a lot of suppressed, repressed, or misunderstood or mismanaged emotions that are trapped in the body in these places that you can liberate. We've had some really, really amazing sort of ways in which people have moved around. I had a person move through their blood vessels, all sorts of stuff. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then there's the psycho-spiritual component of this work. And what we're really talking about this is activating our third eye. A lot of people don't know, but the third eye looks more like this than it does a single color. If you ever really want to study the chakras, please check out Master Choco Sui's pranic healing approach. They go into much more depth about the chakras. You'll learn a lot more than just looking at what the yogis are trying to teach you about these seven. And from what I understand, actually, the seven were only taught to that in that way because they wanted to dumb it down. That's what I'm being told from this, but their system is a lot more complex and it's really beautiful. But this Ajna chakra, I just want to point out there's these 96 petals broken into two divisions and it has multiple colors. And if you ever seen someone with light eyes and their eyes change based off their mood, It has a similar sort of approach with this ajna chakra. It changes based off the psychological features that are going on. And I won't go into all of these, but I'll just say that we're dealing mostly in this space with the third eye. What does that really mean? Right? Are we talking about some spiritual woo-woo? Well, it's important to remember that we have photoreceptors on our pineal gland, right? So the actual gland itself has photoreceptors. This is a fact. It's not just me making some BS up. And it has a function. And the reason why there's photoreceptors there is because during the day, you have an inhibition process where you don't produce melatonin. And at night, these photoreceptors end up producing, they simulate the night. When there's no more sun, they allow the production of melatonin to happen, which puts you to sleep. So there's a value to having these specific non-visual photoreceptors on the pineal gland. But the pineal gland is a physical third eyeball. And this is a fact. It's a biological anatomical fact. And blue light is especially sensitive to this gland. It's why you always see me. I have great eyes. I just wear these blue light glasses. And so they really help a lot. So if you're someone who works on the computer or not, please get a pair of good blue light glasses, and I promise you your sleep will improve. And so this is just a little bit about the science of what's happening with that pineal gland. And then, so a lot of people in the Iboga Psycho-Spiritual Journey don't really understand kind of how you're seeing. And so I try to use this to explain it. But this is the electromagnetic spectrum. Yeah. This little sliver, let me go back. At the bottom of the spectrum, we have radio waves, and at the end, we have gamma rays. Okay. So if you look here, these are waves, right? The longer the wavelength, it means they occur less frequency, which means there's less energy. The shorter the wavelength on this other side, the more they occur, the higher the frequency, the more energy there is. So we're going from this low energy to this high energy stage, and we're going to tie this all in. The human eye only sees a sliver of this entire spectrum, which I'm sure most of us know. But just for context, that is 0.0035% of everything. So what you see is literally what you don't see is 99.9965% of everything you cannot see, just for context. And again, the pineal gland is focused on just a small, even smaller sliver of that, right? And so this is just important to know that this is sort of how our visionary field works. And I'll tie this in, but what I think is happening is Iboga is essentially allowing us to see outside of this visionary field. That's what it's really doing. And I'll show you a better example. The easiest way to frame this is from music. If anyone's ever played music, you know that there's these things called octaves. If you look here, C, D, E, F, G, A, B on a piano, it's the first octave, and then it starts over, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Then there's C, D, E, and over and over and over. These octaves can be thought of as dimensions. So just imagine we exist in this third octave or the third dimension. All Iboga's letting us do is allowing us to see in these other octaves. And just because if anyone's curious, the octave just double. So they're the same thing. They're just compounding on each other. In the exact same way, these aren't different things. This is just energy, and it's moving at different frequencies. And so we call it different names. When it's moving at this very slow, long frequency, we call it long radio waves. And when the same energy is moving very, very fast, we call it gamma rays. But it's all one thing. And so all Iboga is really doing is allowing us to see inside of these different octaves through these energy centers that might be dormant, might be suppressed. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you wonder about fluoride in the water and all these things. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of protocols you can find to decalcify your pineal gland. But all Iboga is really doing is opening up this third eye and allowing you to see into these subtle energy fields that aren't really available to the naked eye. It's why I'm just curious if anyone on this call worked with us and had Iboga and was able to see through their mask. I'm just wondering if you can like put a sign up or a heart up or something. I'm just curious if anyone in this room has experienced that. There's Amelia. Yeah, a few. So a common thing is people have their eye mask on and they're able to see through it. And sometimes I'll even go and put my fingers in front, and it's always a trip for everybody. But what's really happening is your pineal gland is simply just seeing subtle forms of light that are out there. It's not necessarily spooky magic. It's actually very understandable, but it's also really freaking cool when you think about it, like the aspect of this. And now you wonder why it's known as the visionary root of African shamanism. So some of the components of some of the common themes you'll find in the psycho-spiritual journey, um, like we just said, you see through the eye mask. A lot of people travel through the stars. It's a very common thing to see and experience in the Iboga ceremony is moving through the stars. Some people move through wormholes in the stars. I have that happen a lot. A lot of people land and connect to the moon. If you've ever been to Rhythmia, Jerry will give you his whole story about his journey with the moon. But the moon is a very central piece. The branch of the Masoko I was just initiated to is specifically dealing with the moon. And on the moon, this is one thing I will share. Let's say you're someone who lost a relative or a loved one or a child, and you want to speak to someone who's passed on. What we'll actually do is we'll help guide you to the moon. And from there, you call upon the soul of that person. The moon is sort of the meeting ground we use between, excuse me, our world and the spiritual realm and the psycho-spiritual practice. And again, if you do the training with us, we go into all of this kind of stuff. Another way to see it is like having VR goggles. I just thought this was a cool picture. And then, yeah, you can use it to communicate with the other side. We've had it happen time and time again. I had a woman once, just the sweetest lady. Her daughter committed suicide. And in the ceremony, I took her to the moon. I helped guide her there, I should say. And in the moon, we called upon her daughter, and her daughter came down and she was wearing a dark hoodie the whole time. And she just wouldn't communicate, but she was there. And I had this feeling that I needed to leave. So I said, "Hey, I'm going to leave you here. I think you got there. I'm going to let you go." And I left. And as soon as I left, she told me later that the daughter said to her, "Who the fuck was that guy?" And then they started having a conversation, right? And so again, as someone guiding this journey, even though you're interested and you want to hear these conversations, you have to trust yourself to know when to get the hell away and let the person go because it's your journey, it's not ours, even though we want to hear about it all. Some people travel to the future and visit the past. We can talk about that. And then obviously this is that visionary state where you go into. And then a big one that a lot of people have is they have this sort of movie reel like experience and the way it shows up to them. It's a very common theme. Um, yeah, it's incredible to just even imagine that a plant does this with so many people just from eating tree bark. Like, what is that about? Some more aspects of the journey. These are some techniques I like to use when I'm inside of there. Obviously, if you've ever worked with any of these therapists, you might have be familiar with like IFS. I'm not the biggest fan of IFS because I think a lot of people are missing the fact of this idea of like this is all one being. And sometimes people get caught up with the parts, and that could be, in my opinion, more harmful than good. But IFS can be a really powerful system to use inside of this space. Because imagine if you're talking about, I don't know, one of these exiled parts, and now it actually comes alive inside your visionary state. That gives a level of depth to it. I have a buddy of mine who's IFS therapist, had him find dolls that represented his parts and like ride around town on his bike with him. Right. But now imagine you're inside the visionary space, actually able to interact with these parts and talk to them in dialogue. That's powerful. And so even though I'm not the biggest fan of it, I do use it inside of here, but very carefully and very selectively. Stuff that Jung did was a lot like this. He worked in this visionary, finding these archetypes, finding these interesting symbols that sort of present themselves inside of the visionary state, instead of working with them. Somatic experiencing, which we were talking about earlier. Joe just did a breath work last about recapitulation. This is about calling back your energy. I've had tons of people I do recapitulation with. You'll go to a time in your life where you gave your energy away, or maybe something happened, and we'll go back to that moment and snatch it back. And there'll be a whole visual experience of maybe you grabbing a star or light shooting down from the heavens into your heart. I mean, there's so many ways we've seen this sort of happen, but these are just some of the tools we use. I've done a past life regression inside of this space before. I do past life regression without it, right? But I've literally done this, the exact same trance induction inside of an Iboga space, and it works incredible. And then a big one I use a lot is the five remembrances, which I just want to read these because they're really profound. And what they say is that you can remember these five things, the amount of anxiety and suffering in your life will diminish greatly. And so first is I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. The next is I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. Right now, our daughter got her first cold. The first thing I said to myself, instead of panicking, and my first parent, my kid's sick, right? Like, what do I do? I just thought about this. And I said, she's going to have ill health. Even though she's a 9-month-old baby, there's no way to escape that. And instantly my anxiety is gone from that. I can just be present with it. The next is I'm of the nature to die. There's no way to escape death. The next is all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. The next is my actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions, and my actions are the ground upon which I stand. And so imagine you're in the journey state, you have all this GDNF protein, you have this neuroplasticity, and you can plant the seeds of these five remembrances in the psyche of an individual. So sometimes this can be really helpful. And the last one is we have a sort of approach that we like to do is just called have fun. And what I'll do with this sometimes is we'll take you back to your childhood home and I'll have you just play games with yourself. What was your favorite game as a kid? Mine was Ninja Turtles. So I've literally journeyed back in Iboga, found myself as a kid and played Ninja Turtles with myself and just had fun. You'd be surprised what this can do to you when you just allow fun to infuse through your body in the medicine space like this. So often, we are so focused on trauma, 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 and it doesn't have to be that way. Yes, there's times where we have to address certain things, but you can also do a lot with the fun aspect. It's a really beautiful way to sort of balance this. And the next is power of belief. I'll just talk about that real quick. So when you're coming to change your life, what's happening? There's sort of this system we talk about here, and we say that the same thoughts are going to create the same choices. The same choices are going to create the same actions and behaviors. The same actions and behaviors are going to equate to the same experiences, and the same experiences are going to create the same feelings. And round you are going to go, and that's going to create your personal reality as well as your personal suffering. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is what is it that's creating these same thoughts? And from what I believe, personally, a belief, is that it's our belief into things that's creating our thoughts. And this is really the catalyst for the cycle. And so one of the approaches we use inside the framework is a Toltec teaching where we say if each of the bricks on this brick wall, as an example, are a belief that you carry, and this is your psychic reality, or in other words, your personal reality, if each of these bricks is a belief that you carry, then what would you call the concrete? And if you've sat in ceremony with me, you know that we'd call this your faith. The bricks are the beliefs, and the concrete, the faith, is what holds it all together. Without the concrete, this wall would fall down very easily. So, what if you have a belief in your structure that says that I need to be perfect in order to receive love? That's a pretty strong belief that a lot of people have. Now, what if you also have a belief in your structure that says nobody's perfect? Where are you going to go with that one? And so, one of the things approaches we have in the psycho-spiritual journey is to really investigate the beliefs we have, but with the assistance of the medicine. And what you'll start finding is a lot of contradictory beliefs, a lot of beliefs that aren't serving you, that are ready to let go. And then we use Iboga to remove the faith from those beliefs. And actually, Iboga does that on its own. That's really what it does. That's why if someone asks me what Iboga does and I want to give them a cryptic answer and be all, mystical, I'll say Iboga removes the faith from the structure. And they'll be like, what the hell does that mean? And then I'll explain it. But that's what I'm talking about. Iboga removes the concrete from the structure. And so this psychic reality of all your beliefs can fall down. And now you can build up a new one with your own beliefs, a belief that is serving to you. Yeah. And so I want to share just real quick about two just short journeys that we've taken people on. I wrote this up. I've changed a lot of parameters so you won't know the person, of course, and protect their identity, no names. I also got permission for them to share this. So just so you know, it's all good. Um, but this was a gentleman who came to us and he had been struggling with a pornography addiction. You might have heard me share this story before. And done all the support, all the therapy, ayahuasca, psilocybin, everything. And so we're in the journey state, and I'm invited him, if he would like, to go back into his childhood. And so he did, and he went back to a memory where he was in his room watching his parents argue. The parents were arguing about the father's porn addiction or collection. And what happened was the mother forced the father to throw everything out in a trash can. The argument calms down, everyone goes to sleep. The little boy wakes up in the night. He goes out, he goes into the trash can, he grabs a magazine, and he runs back in his room and he starts reading it. And him and his therapist were able to identify that that was the source of his pornography addiction, which makes a lot of sense. There's this traumatic moment, there's all the stress in the house. He grabs his magazine and he has this thing he's holding on to, right? And this is sort of fueled him. And so for his life now, he's been getting into kinkier and kinkier types of porn. And this is becoming a problem for him in his relationship, in his life. And so as I'm guiding him, remember, our brains are in coherence, right? Like we talked about in that shamanism study. So I'm there with him as he's going through this. And the medicine tells me to ask him a question. I say, hey, can you rewind yourself to go back to before you reached into the trash can? And he's like, yeah. And so he rewinds the scene, right? Remember, we talked about this movie reel type of deal. And so I said, okay, now before you reach into the trash can, I want you to ask the medicine a question. Ask the medicine, what is it that you're actually looking for in the trash? And so he says, and he has his hand out like this, like he's reaching in. And he says, medicine, what am I really looking for? And he's quiet for about 20, 30 seconds, and his face balls up and tears start flooding out of this guy's face. And through an emotional release, just a deep, deep emotional release, you hear him murmur the word love. He was looking for love. This kid who never got affection, whose parents never told him, I love you. The only time there was stimulus in the house was when there was a fight over pornography or the dad watched pornography with him as a kid, which they thought was a source of addiction. It wasn't that. His source of addiction was that he was looking for love in pornography. Where are you going to find that? And so he spent his whole life getting kinkier and kinkier types of form, really just looking for love. And this was his golden ticket out. I still talk to this guy. His life is completely different. Relationship, home, everything completely different. And so that is one event of why having someone with you in a psycho-spiritual journey could be so beneficial and why you don't have to dig for the trauma because the medicine is always going to present what needs to be presented. We just follow and trust and be a witness with this. Another one, I try to get creative with these little pictures. Joe hates these when I use too many. Sorry in advance if there's too many. This dude was a former military guy, Navy SEAL sniper. And in his own words, he was an assassin for the US government, in his words. And so in his journey, he raised his hand. I wasn't working with him at the time. I had just finished working with someone else. He raised his hand, asked for me. I was working with someone, so I came over when I was done. And he said to me, he said, hey, I saw this cave. And I was like, really? I was like, do you want to explore it? He said, yeah. So I got my stuff. I came over. We started working with him. And so the point I'm sharing this of the story is because you don't have to dive it into in a moment. You can always come back to the contents you've seen. And that's what's so beautiful about working with Iboga. You have a lot of control in it. And so I say, okay, we do this stuff. I'm like, I want you to find the cave. And he finds his cave. And we go inside and there's this big hole in the ground. And so I said, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, we should jump in. I'm a SEAL, right? Like, let's go for it. And so he jumps into this hole, and a large part of the journey, he was falling with these very interesting items floating around him, like a crown, other relics. Again, going back to this sort of Jungian side of things, right? This archetypal world with this symbology, and there's all this stuff going on. He finally lands to the bottom, and he, as this explorer version of himself, let me mute someone real quick. um, he starts walking around this dark cavern, and out of his satchel, oops, excuse me, out of his satchel comes a spirit, and the spirit points to his hip, and on his hip is a scroll, which he says, "What should I do with it?" And I was like, "Well, do you want to read it?" He said, "Yeah." And so he's laying in his bed, and he goes like this, like he's opening up the scroll. The second he opened that scroll, he turned and rolled over like he was trying to hide it from me. I couldn't see it, obviously, but he turned and rolled like he was trying to hide it from me and started whimpering like a baby. This is a man who was a leader of a Navy SEALs teams, crying like a baby. And through his breath, he said, "Can we please leave?" It's the only words he can get out. Can we please leave? And so what I did with him was, yeah, just take a deep breath. We'll count to three. I want you to jump back up through that hole, get to the top of the cave. One, two, three, jump. He jumped up out of it, got to the top of the cave. And what I had him do was put a sign in front of the cave that says, do not enter until ready, and help reassure him that it's okay. You don't have to go into these things in here. You don't have to explore these things if you're not ready for it. And for this man, I can't tell you this is what happened, but I'm guessing that on that piece of paper was a list of all the people that he's killed. And he was not ready to face that. And that is fucking okay. And this is why we cannot dig for trauma as guides of this. I've seen that happen and I've seen what it does to people. That's not a good thing. You have to be there when you're doing this job just as their friend, doing what's best for them. And so this is another story of someone who benefited from a psycho-spiritual journey. And I'll share one quick last one about the woman with arthritis. Basically, she was telling me this story about how her growing up in Germany, her parents got an opportunity to move into another country to start a new job from some family friends. But the caveat was they couldn't bring her as a little girl. They had to leave her in Germany. And so they left her with a man who ended up abusing her over and over again. And so she's telling me about this abuse. This is how the journey started. It took her back to this moment of her being abused in this way. And I said, well, tell me, how do you feel about this? Right? Like, how do you feel? Right? And she started explaining to me why her parents chose to leave her to do that. And I sat there for a moment, let her talk. And after she was done, I said, let me ask you something. Why did you tell me that? And she said, well, what do you mean? And she's like, they had a good opportunity to go. They had no choice because it created life for me. And now I'm doing this and I'm a doctor and all these things came from that. I said, no, 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 no. Why is it that when I asked you to tell me how you felt, the first thing you did was justify why your parents left you? And she got quiet. And all of a sudden, her fists, which her hands are arthritis, balled up. And if you make a fist right now and act angry and tense yourself, you're going to feel pressure in all of your joints. Arthritis is just unmanifested, unexpressed anger that sits in your system for a long time. You read any metaphysical healing book, and they'll tell you the exact same thing. And what happened was this woman, who was raised Catholic, by the way, and I'll talk about that in a moment, never allowed herself to be angry for the fact that her parents left her with a guy who abused her over and over and over again. Why? And when I asked her this, I said, what religion were you? And she said, I was Catholic. And I said, what's the fourth commandment? If anybody knows, the fourth commandment is honor thy parent. In other words, God is telling you to be a good Catholic, to go to heaven, you have to honor your parent. That means if your parent leaves you with someone who's abusing you to go to another country to start a job, you have to honor your parent in spite of your true feelings, your authentic feelings. And so what she did was went on a fucking cussing spree and let loose about how furious she was, about how mad she was. And her parents were passed already. She doesn't have a chance to tell him. And so she got to tell him in this dimension. And I watched her hands literally go like this in front of me. And I tell you to this day, I've never cried in a journey until that moment because I've never seen something like that. I've seen my teacher Steve do things like that, but I've never seen something like that. That's what this psycho-spiritual journey is about. And to be a guide in that is the greatest honor. It's why I say this is my favorite aspect of the work we do. And a lot of the therapists who end up reaching out to us who want to do the training, the reason is because they want to bring this sort of element into their clinical practice in their own way. And that is one of the most beautiful things. It's what Claudio Naranjo is doing. The only difference is I recommend working with Iboga because it's a lot safer and it's more effective. And then, yeah, the last part is just that if you are interested in doing any of that, just let us know. We do a training program with that. You'll like come work with us. Is the whole thing. I don't know if Brandon's on this call. We have people doing it. But yeah, that's the last part. And I just want to stop and hold some space for any questions, any comments. I apologize for going on 8 minutes over. I was trying to be on time.